Go ahead and get started. So this is a brand new series, Anything Goes Saturday. We started the beginner series on Tuesday night, which is, I think, going to be helpful for those folks who are just starting out crafting. But then I wanted to have just a fun series where we can make anything we like. And so today is the first one. It will be every Saturday at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So, hi Valerie, hi Karen. And let me introduce myself. My name is Linda. I'm an independent demonstrator for Stampin' Up! And you'll see me using Stampin' Up! Products. Now, if you have any questions while I'm going through this, please don't hesitate to leave me a comment. There is a lag time, so if I don't see the comment right away, I will respond to you even after the live streaming stops. All right. Well, for those of you who are familiar with what's going on right now, our occasions catalog and our celebration, I'm really excited because Friday was the release to the general public of a few new items. And one of those just stole my heart, and that's the Springtime Foils Specialty Designer Series paper. So that's what I've chosen today for our project. We're going to be making a box. Not just any box, but a box that is very nice for holding our slim note cards, which I happen to have right here. So these are another item in the Occasions catalog that you can purchase. And I'm on my third pack. I love them so much. They're great for just quick cards that you can give to someone just to let them know that you're thinking about them. But the box is what we're going to be working on today. And there is a die that will cut this out for you. And let me get that. We have a bundle called the Sure Do Love You Suite, and it has a stamp set. I always keep my coordinating dies in with my stamp set, so let me pull that out here. Put it down so you can see it. And what we're going to be using is this guy right here. I'll pull the rest of these out of the way. And this magically will allow you to construct the box in very little time. All right, so before I go any further, let's talk about what we're going to be using, the materials needed to go ahead and make this box. Now, I'm using that Springtime Foils Specialty Designer Series paper, but you know, like everybody else, I like to hoard my paper. So I was thinking to make it stretch, I just did the front and sides, and I left the back using Whisper White. So that helps me save on paper. The pieces that you're going to need is for the Specialty Designer Series papers, you'll need a piece that's 4.5 by at least 6 3/4 long. And that's to make sure that you have plenty of room for this flap at the top. And like I said, you're going to need to cut 2 of these. So we'll cut one out of the Designer Series paper, and we'll cut the other out of the same size paper, but this time in Whisper White. Now, I can't bring my Big Shot into the screen because it's just not going to fit. So I'm going to cut this off screen in just a moment, but I'll show you the sandwich for it. Other items that you'll need, though, are, and if I bring the box back in, I decorated up, although this doesn't need a whole lot of decoration, but for my sentiment, I made a stitch square out of Whisper White. So I have, I put at least a 2-inch scrap. That way it gives you plenty of room in case you don't exactly center your sentiment, and I am famous for that. So I always give myself quite a bit so that way I know I'll be able to use my stitched rectangle die. And then behind that, I have some of our gold foil paper. And I went ahead and pre-cut this. You just need a 1 7/8 square. And that will fit directly behind. And then you'll notice I've got some leaves here. So I have a scrap of gold foil, and I'm going to be using our leaf punch that was released last year, just to go ahead and quickly cut out a couple of leaves. And the last thing we're going to need are 2 lengths of ribbon. One that will go around the box, and this one measures, about a little over 8 1/4 inches. That'll give you ample. And then I also went ahead and tied a bow before we got started. I'm a little bow challenged sometimes, so I like to do that ahead of time so you don't see me fumble around. But that's basically the products we're going to need, other than some fast fuse, Versamark ink, because we're going to heat emboss the sentiment, and some gold emboss powder. Now the sentiment comes from a different stamp set, and this is in our Occasions catalog. It's the Petal Palette, and it's the Life is So Much Better With You in it. All right, let's go ahead and get started. Hi Patricia, hi Karen, hi Lori. Thanks everybody for joining. So I promised I would show you the sandwich. I'm going to get my 2 pieces of paper here that construct the box, and here's my die, and then I'll just bring over the Big Shot plates because I know you'll be able to see those. Now I'm using my magnetic plate. You certainly don't have to do this. If you just have the standard plate with your Big Shot, that's just fine. I would go ahead and tape the die down with a little bit of washi tape just to make sure it doesn't move, unless you've really cut your paper big. So you'll need your base platform or magnetic platform. If you use your base platform, you may also want to use your thin die adapter. And then I'm going to put down one of my well-loved plates. Guess I should take my sticky note off here. And then decide before you put the die on. Remember, this is the front of our box. And the flap is going to be, oops, I'm all turned around, at the top. So with this paper, not a big deal whichever way you go with it, but if you are using a patterned paper that is very directional, you'll want to make sure that you're cutting it so that the die lies with the flap at the top. So I'm just going to go ahead and set this down right about where I want it. And then I'm going to put my other plate right on top. And you know what? Actually, before I do that, remember, always a good idea when you're working with straight edges to tilt so that when it goes through the pressure plate in the Big Shot, it doesn't just get stuck right at that point. All right, I'm happy with that. So I'm going to go ahead and take this over. If you hear any crunching noises, not to worry. The Big Shot will make those as it's cutting out. And I actually run it through twice. I'm going to show you why. One of the reasons that it's so easy to construct a box is that not only does it cut out the flap, but it scores it for you as well. I don't know if you can see that very well, but you have score lines here on the sides and then double score lines at the top where your flap is going to fold. So I'm going to repeat that process one more time. I'm not going to bring the plates over. You guys saw how it works. But this time I'm just using the Whisper White. And that way we'll have all the pieces cut and we'll be ready to start assembling. So really from the time that you cut your paper until the time you're ready to assemble the box, not very long at all. You can crank these out very quickly. All right, so I've got my last piece set up here. And If you ever have a little spot like this that doesn't cut all the way, just go ahead and trim it up with your snips. I think it kind of fell off the side when I angled it. All right, so there you have it. We have our 2 pieces, and we're now ready to start assembling the box. I always like to work with my Whisper White first, since this is the back. Not so much a big deal here because it's pretty easy to tell what's the front. But you see these score lines here. What you're going to do, just make sure that you're folding right on those score lines. And I'm going to bring out my bone folder. You want a nice, strong crease. Just like that. And we're going to repeat that. If your score lines ever don't go all the way through, which sometimes with your thicker paper, like your designer series paper, you can bring out your scoreboard and reinforce those score lines. My Whisper White's looking okay though. Also want to make sure my flaps, and make sure when you're folding your flaps that you're not crossing that score line. It's easy to do, and if you do cross a score line, your box won't close flat. So I'm going to just do that. Now I'm ready. To me, this is always the scary part, is folding my flap score line. So I'm just gently coaxing it right along that line. And then I'm going to come back with my bone folder and burnish it. And then I've got one more to do here. Again, I'm just going to gently coax and burnish. Okay, so we've got half of our box ready to go. Now I'm going to switch over to the designer series paper. And again, I'm going to gently coax it. This one I sent through twice because it was so thick, so it's a little bit easier with those score lines. And I can faintly see them on the inside, which helps. All right, going to do our flaps, making sure we're not crossing over the score line. And now for the big kahuna. If I ever mess up, this is where I do it. I fold my flaps out of the way to make it easier for me to see the score line, and also to get my fingers right there in the corners to make sure that I fold it correctly. And burnish. And then the last one. And again. All right, I think we got it. I'm just going to burnish that down. So we have our 2 pieces now. Yay! Okay, so how does our box go together? Well, I want my sides to show the designer series paper. And remember, we have a front and a back. You want to flap at either end, so don't try to put it together like this. You want to turn it around. And we're going to line these up, and now you can see, without me even attaching anything, how my box goes together. Very simply, if I get all my flaps in. All right? There's only 2 areas that you need to glue down, and that's the sides right here. So I'm going to go ahead and put my tape, and you can either use fast fuse, you can use score and tape, you can even use Tombow liquid glue if you want that little bit of extra wiggle room. I'm going to go ahead and use fast fuse on this. And you can either do the inside of the top, or you could do, if you're more comfortable, you could go ahead and do the outside of these flaps and line them up and put them down. I'm going to go ahead and do the inside of the designer paper. Just being careful that I don't cross over my score line and that I don't get any on my flaps up here. So how are you guys feeling about the fact that Fast Fuse is going to retire? I was just getting used to it. All right. So there we go. Now comes the scary part. I make sure that I've got a flap at each end. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn it this way. Make sure you all can see. This score line here, I want to make sure that I'm butting this right up against it, but also the flap line here. And if you're more comfortable folding that back to make sure you can see it better when you're trying to line it up, you certainly can do that. And then it's simply a matter of, and I'm gently lining up, I'm not pressing down yet. And once I see that I have it right where I want it, I'm going to press down. That's the hard one to do. The rest is easy because all you have to do is fold this flap over, and then you should be able to get my score line in there. Should just be able to lay this down, and it should line right up for you. Fold that back down. So you want to fold that in. Remember, we've got our tape on the underside. I'm going to pick this up just so I can be sure that I am lining it up correctly. And if you want to just hold it up like this, that's just fine too. So I'm keeping even. Actually, I'm going to fold in that line so I don't cross it. I want to make sure I line that up and that I line that up. And voila, there we have it. Okay, so I can tuck this flap in, and I can tuck this flap in. And that's the makings of our box. Not bad. Now we get to the fun part, which is decorating it. So I'm going to bring the, whoops, sorry, my Fast Fuse didn't stick down there. Sometimes when you don't have anything inside to hold pressure on it, it doesn't want to stick. So I'm going to take my bone folder and give it a good smush. You like that word, smush? It's my new technical term. Ah, that's much better. Okay, now I can close it up. There we go. All right. So this is the top of my box. I'm going to bring the other box in just so you can see that the first thing I'm going to do is let's go ahead and get our heat embossing out of the way. So I'll bring in that scrap piece of paper and I've got my stamp already mounted and it says, "Life is so much better with you in it." Because we're heat embossing, a very important step, and I learned this the hard way, you always want to use your embossing buddy, especially when you're using gold or silver, because they will show up. If you're using clear and white, sometimes they're not quite so obvious if you get a few extra speckles. But with your gold and silver, definitely you want to treat that paper. All right, now I'm going to line this up, get out my Versamark, give it a good ink, make sure I have my stamp the right side, and then I'm going to just try and get it centered, keeping in mind I'm going to have that stitched square die that I'll be using. All right, give it a good press. Boy, I didn't clean that very well from when I used it last, but I think it'll be fine since we're using gold. So, go ahead and put my Versamark away and get out my embossing powder. And I've just transferred it from the jar into this container. Kind of helps contain it a little bit better so it doesn't get all over. make sure that you're happy with the coverage. Tap lightly. If you tap too hard, you can end up losing some of it. All right, that's looking good. Sorry if I got a little off screen there, guys. And now we're ready to heat emboss. Because this piece of paper is kind of small and I don't want to burn myself with the heat gun, I like to use this little miniature cutting board I found. And I just have a binder clip that I put on it. That helps keep it flat. It also helps me from burning my fingers. It doesn't tend to warp quite as much. Now I apologize, it's going to get a little noisy. I'm going to pull this up a little bit. Make sure you get your heat gun nice and hot before you bring it to the paper. That will also help from the warping. And then you want to bring it in and just go over the paper. And I love watching it turn shiny. So remember, that's how we know if it's done, if it's all shiny. And I tip it up in the light to make sure I don't have any dull parts. You don't want to overheat it. Ooh, that's better. You don't want to overheat it because then your embossing powder will bubble up. I'm going to take this off and just set it aside to cool for a moment. And like I said, we're going to be using our stitched shapes to cut that out. We also are going to use that gold square, and I've got stuff all over my desk here. But while I'm waiting for that to cool, I'm going to cut my leaves, because remember, on this box, I have a leaf at the top, leaf at the bottom. You certainly don't have to add the leaves if you think that that's too much, but I just thought it gave it a nice finish. So I'm going to pop open my punch, simply bring it in, and give it a couple of good squeezes. If you wanted to do 3, you certainly could do 3. I know 3 tends to look best when you're working with embellishments and things, but with this small a box, 3 just seemed to be a little too much. All right, let me get rid of some of this stuff here. Put my scraps away. Move that out of the way. And I think we're ready to cut out with the stitched rectangle. So, sorry gang, hang on just a minute. I had it out. And it's on my desk somewhere. Oh, good grief. There it is, right in front of me. All right, so we're going to use our Stitched Shapes framelits. And there are 4 squares. The one that worked the best for me, and as far as proportions for the box, was the second to the smallest. So that's the one I'm going to use. I'm going to bring my Big Shot plates over again. And this is why I said I gave it at least, I used at least a 2-inch wide and at least 2 inches long, because if you get this off kilter, at least you've got enough wiggle room there with extra space around it to line things up. And again, this is a square, so I'm going to tilt it. And if I hang over the side and stick my tongue out just right, I'll get it straight. Okay. I'm going to take this over to the Big Shot. Oops, it moved on me there. And 1, 2, 3. And it's cut out. Okay, so I am not going to put this, pop this up. I'm going to adhere this directly to the gold foil. And because I do want a little wiggle room, I'm going to go ahead and use my multi-purpose glue. Now, I don't take my glue all the way to the edge because sometimes you do have to wiggle it around. And if you've got your glue all the way up to the edge, when you wiggle it, you're going to leave glue on the paper. Okay, move this up. And usually if I can get the corner right here angled in right, that gets it set up so that there's an even border all the way around. This I need to wiggle just a tiny bit. And there we go. Now I'm going to take a block and put that down on there so that it adheres well to the foil. Okay, I'm going to bring the box back in, and we're going to go ahead, I have to remember where my top is, we're going to go ahead and wrap our ribbon around it. There's no big science to this. You could measure for the exact center if you so desire. I just kind of wing it. And my favorite way to adhere ribbon to cardstock, especially when it's a designer series foil where it might take a little bit longer for Tombow to dry, I just use glue dots. So I'm going to take and put a glue dot on one end, and then I'm going to figure out roughly, there we go, wrap it around to the back, and try to get it straight back there as well. Don't stick, thank you. Okay, and then I'm going to put a glue dot on the other end, making sure I have the bottom side, not the top side. Wrap it around again and line it up. And there we go. You certainly, if you don't want this top part to move around at all, can put a glue dot underneath, but our sentiment's going to take care of that for us because I am going to pop the sentiment up. So we'll take some Stampin' Dimensionals. I use 4 of them. We don't want to impede the ribbon, so I'm only going to put it at the very top corners. Now, if you ever can't get the backs off of these things, like sometimes I struggle with, if you press down in the center, it lifts the edge just enough where you can grab those backings. And into the trash they go. Okay, let's decide where we want to put this. And I'm thinking if you just gently lay it down and don't press, you can maneuver it a little bit, but that looks pretty straight to me, so I'm going to go ahead and press down. Now I'm going to take my leaves and decide where I want them. I think I want one there, and one right there. You can use a mini glue dot to hold it down if you like. I'm just going to use a little bit of Tombow. I'm pretty good at getting a thin line, but really, if you get it on the leaves, and I just do these 2 leaves, I leave the top one without any glue on it, so it can have just a little bit of movement. And then I'm just going to slide that under. I like that. Press it down. And do the same with this one. Plus, that way I don't get glue on my fingers. I hate glue on my fingers. All right, we are almost done, gang. The last thing to do is to put on our bow. I'm going to straighten it up just a little bit. And again, I use glue dots. The mini ones work really well for this. If you ever have any sticking outside of where you want it, just roll it in on itself. I start with just one at the back. I'll come back probably and put a couple more on where the tails are to keep them straight. And then, do I want it this way or do I want it this way? Nope, I want it this way. And I'm just going to put that right there. And see how my tails are kind of cattywampus? You can control that just by using a couple of glue dots. So I'm going to get my pokey tool. Yes, Lori, it's my pokey tool. And just lift off a glue dot. Raise this up and put it right there where I want it. Come on, Lego. And then I can lay it straight down, and that takes care of it going all over the place. So I'll do the same on this side, although this one is behaving pretty good. Make sure I get it semi-straight. And then all that's left to do is trim those tails. Now, my daughter-in-law, Valerie, taught me a very, very important thing, and that is you want to keep a separate pair of scissors for ribbon cutting. Have you ever gone to cut ribbon and it just kind of chops it up? Well, if you're using the same scissors that you use to cut paper, it gets a little dull. So I have a pair of scissors that I pretty much keep just for ribbon cutting. And that way I know I'm going to get a good result every time I use them. Get rid of that. And that, as they say, is that. So there's our lovely box. And it will fit quite a few cards. I just have 3 cards and 3 envelopes that I put in the other one. But as you can see, they fit in there very nicely. And you still have room to spare. And because we made sure, well, if I put my, there. Because we made sure that when we were gluing, we did not go over the flap score line, you can see how our flaps are laying really nice. All right, so that was the project that I wanted to show you today. Not bad, we did that in just over 30 minutes, I think. Does anyone have any questions for me? All right. Thank you, Mary. Hi, Patricia. Okay, thanks so much for all the hearts and smiles, you guys. I really appreciate it. I'm going to go ahead and end our video. Like I said, if you do have any questions that you think of after the live stream, just drop me a comment in the chat box and I'll get right back to you. Otherwise, for those of you who are going to come back on Tuesday night for the beginner series, I'll see you then. The rest of you, ta until next Saturday. Have a great rest of the weekend. Bye now.